Hey guys, this is Rurouni K95 here, and it is time for a new video, which is my top 10 favorite manga that I have for today, because we're going to be doing my top 10 favorite manga, which is something that I haven't thought of doing one before, which I should have done, but I haven't thought of it until now, basically. Because I have picked about 10 of these manga titles from my manga collection, just to get a little head starters up for my top 10 favorite manga that I wanted to do for this video, because despite that I'm starting to become a manga reader, and I had to pick something which I consider to be my favorites, in my opinion, especially for a manga reviewer like me, basically. And on top of this has got me thinking, though, is that I wanted to do a manga review like this one. Well, particularly for the most part, which I'll be reviewing some more as soon as I can. Number 10, Yu Hakusho. What can I say? This is basically one of my favorite manga series from Yoshihiro Togashi, because this has some new stories on here, basically, which are never shown, unlike the anime version. I may like the manga, though, because it has some newer short stories on there, sort of like in its own certain ways of how what Yoshihiro Togashi has come up with some ideas, basically. Yeah. If you don't know what this is, come check this manga out, because this is a favorite as well. I mean, tells a story about Yusuke Urameshi, who is your typical teenager delinquent, with his selfless act of how it changed his life. When he died, when he was trying to save a kid from a speeding car, of how something must have hit him accidentally. Now he's basically as a ghost with a mission, with the good deeds, with the help of Botan, who is the spirit guide of the dead, Koenma, who is basically her boss from the other side, about strange things happening as well, until Yusuke Urameshi, along with Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei, which are these characters that are introduced as well. In these, there's different arcs on here, like the Dark Tournament arc on here in the manga, because what can I say? Because the Dark Tournament arc, in my opinion, is one of my favorite arc from the source material of the Yu Hakusho on here. Because, well, the anime you have to be in the mood for. This you have to read anytime. What can I say? I love Yu Hakusho. Number 9, Oh My Goddess, which is a well-acclaimed classic manga from Kosuke Fujishima, who is the director of he's actually the manga creator of You're Under Arrest on here. But this manga tells a story about how Keiichi, who was in a college dorm, basically, of how, until Belle Dandy arrived as well, particularly, of how she could grant Keiichi's one wish, of how he could be in love with Belle Dandy on here. So that grants her wishes, because they kicked particularly Keiichi out of the boys' dorm in the college on there. So they found like a temple on here, including one of other Belle Dandy's other sisters, like Scold and Erd on there as well. Because this is like your typical, like, humor, but it also has some moments for your typical, for the romance on the manga on here, particularly. But not only that, it's also with a little bit of harem on here, unlike most of the manga out there, come to think of it, particularly. Yeah, what can I say? This sort of kind of basically have its own coincidentally ways of how consider the fact of how this is basically more similar, kind of like Tenchi Muyo, but more different, though. Oh My Goddess, one of my favorites from Kosuke Fujishima on here, because I'm still currently reading the manga, by the way. Number 8, Uru Sayatsura. This is basically my favorite manga from Rumiko Takahashi on here, because, you know, she's the creator of Ranma One Half, Inuyasha, Meizanikoku, what many of her famous works on here. Yeah, this is basically your typical romantic comedy and manga with a bit of some sci-fi, but it has its moments on here basically. But that's particularly the reason of how this manga was published on October in 1980 on here, and I wonder why. Basically, yeah, this manga basically tells a story about Ataru Moroboshi, who is a teenage high school delinquent, perverted loser, basically wanted to win the game of tag so he could win his childhood girlfriend Shinobu back as well. Well, just to prevent, but instead, you know, especially for the arrival of Lum herself, particularly. So, when basically, so this has got to the thinking is that Lum always ends up falling in love with Ataru Moroboshi, basically. Yeah, that's what basically of how the story in Uru Sayatsura is about, particularly. Yeah, because what can I say? Yeah, I think I love the art style of the manga. Other than the anime. Well, the manga at least has a good style, unique from Rumiko Takahashi's art style, particularly. Sort of like how most of her famous works, that how she's been basically wanted to consider how this as well. Yeah, this also had an anime adaptation that came out, that premiered on October 14th, 1981, probably around the same time as D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds, Ulysses 31, Beast King Go Lion, Hello Spank, Dr. Slump, God Mars, yeah, you name those. But for the manga, however, I really loved it because I thought it was unique, particularly, for Rumiko's art style, particularly. So that's how I got this as well. Number 7, Fushigi Yugi, the Mysterious Play. Hold on. Sorry about that. So, Fushigi Yugi, the Mysterious Play, however, it just basically tells a story about how Miyako Yuki, who is basically your typical normal junior high school girl, being transported into a fictional version of the ancient China in which is in the book, The Universe of the Four Gods, basically. So they thought that she became like the priestess of Suzaku as well. In my opinion, Fushigi Yugi is basically one of my favorite mangas from Yu Watase, basically. You know, because Yu Watase is the mangaka artist of series Celestial Legend. But I noticed that this, in my opinion, basically, Fushigi Yugi is particularly my favorite on here. Because I love the manga, though. Because I think that's a good way to start, basically, of how you consider the fact of how I may like the manga, other than beside the anime adaptation, though, but the manga, in my opinion, though, is that I still enjoy the manga, though, because it's a lot more fun and more entertaining when it comes to reading the manga, particularly. Yeah, because that's just my opinion, though. What can I say? I love Fushigi Yugi. So that's my top. Your top 10. Hold on. 110. Number 6, Rurouni Kenshin. This is my favorite manga series from Nobuhiro Watsuki on here. In my opinion, this is basically becoming one of my all-time favorite manga series on here. Because I know this lasted about like 28 volumes on here, particularly. Of how what Nobuhiro Watsuki has got a lot to do with on here. Because there are some like side story, like special side stories in the manga, and like in between the like in between the chapters on here, which are part of the end of volume specials under Meiji Swordsman Romantic Story on here, which is something that you don't see in the anime adaptation, basically. Well, the story in Rurouni Kenshin basically tells about the story of how it takes place in the 11th year of the Meiji in the middle of Tokyo, of how, which has happened back 140 years ago in Kyoto, with the coming of these the black ships coming from the America, where there was a warrior who was felling men with his blood-stained sword, which goes by the name Hitokiri Batosai the Manslayer, or most significantly, Batosai the Manslayer, with his killer blade help with the close for the turbulent during the Bakumatsu era, of how it's becoming the progressive age known as the Meiji, until he wanders off into the sunset after he gave up on being a manslayer, so instead he becomes a wanderer, particularly. Yeah. Rurouni Kenshin manga, in my opinion, this is basically my favorite. I can do a manga review on this at some point, but I'll do it as soon as I can, once I get more volumes. Spoilers beware. Yeah, because I'll probably reread the manga as soon as I can, once I get more volumes as well. Yeah, I love this as well. Number 5, Inuyasha. This is basically her second favorite from Rumiko Takahashi's works on here, because she's the creator of Uru Sayatsura, Ranma, One Half, Maison Ikoku, stuff like that. Yeah, Inuyasha, basically, in my opinion, however, it's basically my second favorite on there. Yeah, what can I say, though? In my opinion, when I first read this one, I really enjoyed this one as well, particularly, of how the story basically tells the story about how Inuyasha wants to fight off in the village, of how he's getting those Shikon shards until he got shot by Kikyo's arrow, which pinned him to the tree, just was before Kikyo died, until of how it's happening in the feudal era. During the present-day Japan, Kagome, who is your typical modern Japanese high school girl, who has basically never believed in myths and legends, even though her grandfather is always obsessing with these old stories of how there's mystical talismans everywhere, of how there's legend attached as well, when a creature pulls her out of her own world into the ancient past in Japan, until she encountered Inuyasha, basically. Yeah, Inuyasha thought that Kagome is like the reincarnation of Kikyo, particularly. Well, Kagome is never a reincarnation of Kikyo to begin with, particularly. So basically, Inuyasha has great story, great humor. This is the one you love to hate to love. Well, you know what it is as well, particularly. Because I consider this to be one of those mangas I can do a reread on there. I'm still currently rereading the manga as well. What can I say? Number 4, Lupin III. In my opinion, Lupin III was created by manga artist Monkey Punch on here. I mean, this basically considered to be my all-time favorite, sort of like Cowboy Bebop in its own way of how considered the fact, but this is before than that as well, accordingly, of how I can understand why. And on top of this, Lupin III is basically of how there were these mystical misadventure or antics, as how considered the fact of how everything seems as goes. It's about, the story in Lupin III basically just about Daisuke Jigen, Goemon, Fujiko, Lupin are always wanting to go on these particular, considered of how these of how these misadventure antics all over everywhere as well, until of how, in case you're wondering, just to consider the fact of how what they wanted to do when Lupin was trying to outrun Zenigata, who is the Interpol police as well, particularly. Because, yeah, Lupin is basically your international man of mystery in manga as well. Because there were several active contests, particularly of how consider the fact of how Lupin III is basically considered to be my classic favorite on here. Because what can I say? When I first read the manga, I really enjoyed it because I love Lupin III. Because this introduced me to Lupin III. That's why. Because I think it ran into a series of anime, television series, movies, OVAs, TV specials, crossovers, including the one with Detective Conan, and the CGI film that came out on probably 2019, which is the CGI Lupin movie. The manga, however, this got me introduced to Lupin III, that's why. Number 3, Ranma One Half. What can I say? I love Ranma One Half. This is basically my all-time favorite manga from Rumiko Takahashi, because this is basically of how this tells a story about Ranma and his father Genma Sawatome, who are in China, were training in the martial arts, right where those cursed spring ponds are, when they wanted to do this, particularly of how they could do best at its martial arts at its finest. But his father falls into a cursed spring, which is basically the spring of drowned panda, and then when he wants to still in combat martial art fight with Ranma, but then this was until Ranma Sawatome falls into the spring of drowned woman, or spring of drowned girl, and that means Ranma has become as the girl, the female form of himself. But this time the hair is all red, but when he's splashed with hot water, he's basically the boy when his hair's black, but when cold water splashes on him, he becomes the girl and his hair's all red as well. Same goes for Genma Sawatome. He becomes a panda when cold water splashed on him. So when they brought basically of how they got him to the Tendo Dojo training place as well, of how he wants to pick a fiancé, particularly, of how, which is a perfect girl for Ranma on here, but they didn't basically like each other, especially of how relationships didn't turn out well for Ranma Sawatome, if he wasn't interested, if he could, as well. And not only that, there were some rivals on here. The female suitors for Ranma when Ranma is the boy, and you have male suitors for Ranma when Ranma is the girl, particularly accordingly to the fact of how the story goes, of how it's happening in Ranma One Half. What can I say, particularly? Ranma One Half is basically my favorite on here as well. Because I know this is from the creator of Inuyasha, Uru Sayatsura, Maisen Ikoku, many of her, majority of her work on here. I mean, this basically has your stories where you take romantic comedy on here, which is a little more different from the other, like sort of like Urusei Yatsura, especially on there, as well as martial arts, of how it's depicted from any martial arts anime on here. And there's also some dark chapter parts, which I think this is almost to predate Inuyasha, especially for the final volume of the Ranma One Half manga, accordingly to the fact. Yeah, this especially if you want to binge read on something to read, like this is the one I have here particularly, especially when I'm talking about the Ranma One Half on here as well. Number 2, Fist of the North Star. Oh yes, Fist of the North Star, my favorite 80s manga of all time, because this is like your typical post-apocalyptic martial arts manga from Jump Comics that was serialized under Weekly Shonen Jump on here particularly. Because, what can I say? Because I love Fist of the North Star. Yeah, this basically tells the story about how the world has been into a nuclear war, of how everything's going into a wasteland of how the story goes. Everyone was going over for clean food or water, particularly, and they were surrounded by these bandits on here, particularly. The man with the 7 scars himself, Kenshiro, has to fight off the bad guys with his fists by giving them the pressure points to make the opponents' heads explode as well as the bodies explode as well. When he was on a journey to search for his lover, Yuria, what Kenshiro had a lot to do, particularly of how this goes. There's some arcs in there of how you could find in the Fist of the North Star if you ever read the manga in Japanese, particularly. Because I may like the anime and the manga better than the crap-ass live-action adaptation movie with Gary Daniels. I mean, I hate the live-action adaptation with Gary Daniels. But the anime and the manga, however, it's better to enjoy, basically. Yeah, Fist of the North Star anime has spawned into a series of television series, movies, OVAs, and even video games on here. Yeah, and it's also the 1986 Fist of the North Star anime movie on here. What can I say? I love the anime movie on here because Fist of the North Star, the movie, which is the anime one from 1986, I loved it because it helps to have read the original manga if you ever watched the TV series as well, because you're definitely in for this. I mean, this is how, to the great examples before other ones such as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, as well as Berserk as well. Now that you mention this. Number 1, Berserk. My favorite manga from Kentaro Miura. Yeah, this is basically, in my opinion, when I first read the Berserk manga, I loved it. This is basically my favorite dark fantasy manga on here. Because I know there's some, like, horror on elements on there as well. And, I mean, this basically tells the story about Guts, the Black Swordsman, who is a feared warrior, how he was spoken to these whispers of his gigantic sword and an iron hand, which is the scars of how these countless battles and tortures, when his flesh is basically indelibly marked within the bound of how he's the unholy symbol, of how there's forces of darkness towards him, of how it dooms him as their sacrifice. He will not take the fate lying down to begin with. When he cuts the crimson swath of the carnage through these ranks of how the damned of how it's going. When he was accompanied by Puck the elf, of how it's more annoyance than a companion, when he has nothing to do with as well. This is how it follows a dark, bloodstained path when it only leads to vengeance or sudden death, as how this goes. Yeah, basically, Berserk, in my opinion, this is actually my favorite manga from Kentaro Miura on there. Because I know Berserk has spawned into you have the anime adaptation series from 1997. Same with the Golden Age arc movies on here. And the 2016 Berserk anime TV series. I mean, which is almost as true to the original manga source material on here. Well, the anime adaptation, you have to be in for binge watch or something, but the manga, however, you can throw in any time if you ever want to read the Berserk manga on here, particularly. Yeah, because this is actually my favorite manga from Kentaro Miura on there. Yeah, because, well, what can I say? I love Berserk on here. Because Berserk is basically one of my favorites on here as well, because I love me some dark fantasy manga. As much too, there's other dark fantasy manga out there as well. Okay, so there are my honorable mention. If you ever love dark fantasy manga, you have to check this out as well. Okay, for the honorable mentions that I have on, that are also part of my favorite mangas on here, let's see. There's a lot to choose as well. For every manga, have its honorable mentions of how they're considered to be my favorite on here. Okay, there's a lot as well. Many to choose from as well that I'm not too picky about. We have many of these other ones, like Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, that's an honorable mention. And there's Air Master, another manga that I just read online, also part of my honorable mention. And Please Tell Me Galko-chan. Those are the 3 honorable mentions I have on my favorite mangas on here. Well, I think I've read Air Master and Please Tell Me Galko-chan on Manga Geek app on my phone, basically, because I just read them for free sometimes, but I just prefer to own physical copies of it as well, particularly, according to learn over the fact as well. So that's going to be it for my top 10 favorite manga for today's video for today, guys. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's what I'm going to say for this video. Well, because this is the first time I wanted to do like a new video where I'm showcasing on here, because I picked about 10 of these manga books just to do a top 10 favorite. So I think that's basically 10 titles on here, because it wasn't easy to choose as well, especially for a manga title to pick for your top 10 as well, accordingly. That's why. Because I have been starting doing manga reading as well, because even though I have a lot of manga on there, because I have wanted to, given the fact there's most mangas I like on here, most of them I can reread, most of them I'm considered to be my favorites on here, just because I'm considering the fact of how I was always being a manga reader as well. From what I to learn the fact of, well, imagine of how I'm basically wanted to read some manga on here. That's considered the good fact of how I wanted to appreciate things as well, accordingly. And then afterwards, basically, of how this is how reading manga books on here is more different besides reading comic books in general. Well, I read both in general though, but I do appreciate as well, particularly accordingly, because I have good taste in manga as well. Yeah, because I wanted to pick some manga that I like, that are considered to be my favorites, ones I can review, as well as reading logs, and also some reread the manga on here when it's been a while since you finished reading as well. There's some ongoing series also that are also on my current reading log. Hope subscribe for content. My Anime Planet link in the description down below. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, the link will be in the description down below, because I have a huge backlog of anime and manga on my Anime Planet account on here. My Patreon link will be in the description down below. Oh, and you have to be a grown-up to follow me on Patreon as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below on this video if you like as well. And also be sure to smack the like button if you enjoy this video. Let me know if you like this video as well. Be sure to click on the subscribe button. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you feel free, if you're new to my channel as well, smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified also as well for more latest updates. And keep it otaku for my top 10 favorite manga video. This is Rurouni K95 saying thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you liked it. I hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video. Hope you have a great day. This is Rurouni K95 signing off. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you soon for more videos. Take care. Bye.